What's going on, guys? Welcome to Rob's house. Late night today. I had a little bit of a snag, unfortunately. So I took the Viper on its maiden voyage. After finally tuning it, I wanted to do a highway bomb. Car was great, no problems. Shortly after, the forecast was saying that it was supposed to rain tonight. So shortly after I started noticing some drops on my windshield, I figured it started raining. It didn't start raining. I don't know exactly what happened, but the intensity of the droplets began to accelerate, and I noticed smoke coming out of the hood. As soon as I saw smoke coming out of the hood, I was like, all right, something's wrong. I was actually on my way to pick up a car part, got there, saw the hood was smoking, popped the hood, and saw coolant everywhere. I mean, all over the place. So I've already cleaned the car up after getting it home. Basically, we had coolant just literally like it was sprayed out by the fan all the way out. Hypothesis right now, I called Blake from Freedom Motorworks, asked him what he thought. He was like, dude, honestly, your radiator probably just popped. Like it probably cracked somewhere. Started, you know, it's pressurized, it started pissing coolant out, and then I'm assuming the fan just started shooting it everywhere, right? With the Viper, you have this these heat extractors. So what happened was the fan wasn't only shooting it all over the motor, it was shooting it through the heat extractors, getting all over the windshield, and like the whole side of the car was just like covered in coolant. Not great. So I had to limp the car home. On the highway, it was fine. I think it still probably had some coolant left in the system. As soon as I got off the highway, the temperature began to climb rapidly. So I had to make a couple stops to let the car cool down. But I did make it home, drove fine, didn't feel weird at all. It was just coolant issue. Kind of unfortunate. We are going to confirm this weekend. Today's a Friday. We're gonna confirm at some point this weekend. Blake's gonna come over. He's got a pressure tester. We're gonna pressure test it and see what's actually going on. Looks like we're gonna need a new radiator, unfortunately. So that's what this video is gonna be about, because why not, right? Whatever the Viper actually needs, that's what we're gonna replace. All right, guys, so we found the issue. Blake came over yesterday. Shout out to Blake for bringing that pressure tester over. Appreciate it. We found the issue. It's pretty much what we suspected, in that the radiator sort of exploded. So if you look right there, see all that? I actually thought the failure would have happened on these plastic tanks on either side of the radiator, because that's like a typical fail point for like cheaply made radiators that have those the plastic tanks on the side. Usually after being heat cycled enough and like pressurizing, depressurizing, back and forth, hot, cold, eventually they crack. But usually that results in like kind of a slow leak. So I thought like, usually those tanks are like epoxied on. So I thought like maybe the epoxy gave, or I don't know, something burst, right? And I started losing coolant rapidly. Well, it turns out what actually happened was something must have hit the radiator. And as you can see, since it's kind of like toward the top of the radiator, I bet a rock just flew in, and I mean you can kind of see the intake ducts there, but I think like a rock just flew in or something when I was on the interstate, because it was right after I got off the interstate that I noticed that there was coolant starting to. Actually, at first I thought it was raining, because I just saw some drops on my windshield, and then I quickly realized like it's not raining. That's not good. Now, you know, not the end of the world. I mean, either way, regardless of how it failed, the fix is going to be a replacement radiator. So I've already ordered one from Row Racing. I ordered an all aluminum radiator, so I won't have a problem with the plastic tanks on the side. Anyway, we should be back on the road pretty quickly. The rest of this video will fast forward to probably a week from now when the radiator comes in, and I'll show you guys how to do a radiator swap on a Gen 3 Viper. Fast forward in time, new radiator's here. I'm pretty excited. I started removing this fan shroud, and there's actually a few lines down there. You can't really see it from this angle. I'll show you on the bottom. So basically we're gonna have to disconnect those. We're gonna have to, the AC condenser is mounted to the front of the radiator, so we'll have to disconnect that, pull the hoses off, and then the radiator should slide right out once we take these mounts off. Get under the car real quick and I'll show you guys. All right, so right here, so we got these two lines. I actually don't know if this is like, I don't know what this is, to be honest with you. A little more involved than what I saw from like a Gen 2 Viper. Gen 2 Viper just has like 4 bolts and you just like pull the fan shroud out, but nothing that we can't handle. You know, to get to those lines, I did have to take part of that like belly tray off, which is just a series of bolts, and it's also what holds the bottom of the front fascia on. So I took that off. There's 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the actual fan shroud. Once we get that out, we'll have
easy access to literally everything. We can pull the hoses off,
swap the radiator out. I'll be right back after I get that fan shroud out, and I'll show you the next steps. All right, guys, so we ran into a snag here. So first of all, this fan shroud has this, it's like a hydraulic fan or something. This motor on the back, there are those lines on the bottom, and I could not crack them loose because they're actually connected through the power steering line. So they're pressurized and stuff. So we're not gonna actually take that out, but I have the fan shroud like free basically, and in theory we could slide the radiator out. I pulled the hoses off the radiator. The problem is the AC condenser is still mounted to the radiator, and my intercooler is kind of in the way. So I can't, you can kind of, there's a bolt behind, piece of insulation there, you can kind of see it.
You want me to lift up?
There's another, no, it's fine. There's another bolt behind that intercooler hose, and I just can't get my hands in there. You can kind of see on this side, you can see one of the bolts there and one of the bolts in the top there. Those wouldn't be too hard to get to, but the problem is since I can't get to the ones on the left-hand side, we're just gonna pull the front bumper so I can get to all 4 of those bolts, unbolt the AC condenser, and then we should be able to just slide the radiator out. I already unbolted it from, there's a couple bolts on the bottom of the radiator holding it in place where it connects to the frame. And I already unbolted that, I already unbolted the top mounting parts. So it should slide right out. We have the hoses disconnected and everything. Should slide right out, no problem. But we gotta get this front bumper off first so that I can get the condenser disconnected. So I will be right back when I've done that. Okay, we got the radiator out. Kind of annoying, mainly because we didn't take the fan shroud out because I couldn't disconnect those lines. So they were really on there, and I didn't feel like depressurizing the whole power steering system. So the one thing that I did that is kind of unorthodox, because the inlet for the radiator is up here, and then the exit is on the bottom, right on this side, on the passenger side. I cut this tab off of the fan shroud. So I'll only have 3 tabs connected to the radiator once I put it back in. But like whatever, that should be fine. I don't think that's, and not only will that hold it in place, but the actual air box intake that bolts to the top of it also, I mean, you got to figure there's a hose clamp that goes on the supercharger itself. So I'm not really worried about it like jostling around or anything like that. I could show you guys, you can kind of see that tab down there that I cut off. Getting the condenser off, the one bolt that was a pain because of my intercooler, the intercooler hose and the AC line were both in the way, was the bottom one on this side. So I'm also, when I bolt the condenser back to the radiator, the AC condenser, I'm not gonna put that bolt back in because it was impossible. I had to like wedge my hands in there and use an open wrench and nudge it like 1/32 of a turn at a time, basically. It was ridiculous. So, but I did get it out. So now we just gotta slip the new radiator in. That shouldn't be too bad. And then basically just put everything back together. We did transfer the clips. Okay, so we transferred all the clips over to the new radiator. Actually, this thing I had unbolted. I thought that it was like connected to the car, but it's actually not. And it was bolted to the radiator, and on the bottom it has these rubber stops. So I'm gonna transfer the rubber stops onto the radiator, the bottom radiator posts. I also have to transfer the mounting rubber things into these recesses. That's pretty much it. The car is a separate oil cooler, so the only connections to the radiator are the inlet and the exit, and then that's the drain over there. So it's just a basic radiator. There's nothing. If you watch my C6 Corvette radiator video, that's like an all-in-one, like a 3-in-1 cooler, where you have a trans cooler, an oil cooler, and like the regular radiator, like the coolant, all in one unit. So there were several hoses that we had to disconnect. That is not the case with this radiator, so this should be a lot easier. The hard part's gonna be sliding this radiator back in and then getting everything to sort of like line up. Hopefully the AC condenser, because it's not really held in by anything right now, hopefully that will sort of just like line up and I'll be able to kind of put those bolts back where they were to secure it to the radiator. That's really the only thing, besides like slipping the radiator in and not like damaging it in the process, that I'm like kind of worried about, but should be okay. Put the hoses back on, then we'll just put the car back together, put the bumper back on, all that stuff. Taking the front bumper off is not terrible. The one thing that's kind of hard is this up here, this location. There's like there's a plate here. You can see sort of, oh sorry.
up here, this location, you can see a screw sticking out, but there's a plate up top. There's another hole here, and there's a plate that slides onto this and kind of like holds the fender together here. That you got to do it manually. It's 10 mil. You got to do it manually. It's kind of annoying, but it's not hard. It's just like annoying. That was really the only tricky part. Aside from that, it was just like bolts along here, a couple bolts on the underside here that thread in, and then all along underneath where that plastic cover goes, there's just like a bunch more bolts down there, and then it bolts to the there's 3 screws here that bolt to the fender liner. So like, it's just a lot of stuff to take off, but there's nothing like difficult to take off with respect to that. That only took us maybe like 30 minutes to get the bumper off, and like we didn't even know what we were doing. So if I had to do this again, I could probably do it in less time. I can actually show you the damage on the old radiator now that it is out of the car. So that's the damage right there. You can kind of see where the channel got broken here. So that channel running here, it got severed, and that's where the coolant was leaking out from, and it was just spraying everywhere. Shouldn't have that problem anymore. And this new radiator is an all aluminum radiator, so it doesn't have the plastic tanks, the plastic intake and exit tanks on the side. It's all aluminum welded on. So it's just a much nicer radiator, and it's a triple pass, which is cool. It's supposed to be a drop-in replacement. It should hold up a lot better. A lot of times those plastic tanks crack eventually as well. Mine hadn't done that yet, but that's just something that does unfortunately happen. So anyway, I'm gonna get back to it. I haven't really been time-lapsing it because you won't be able to see anything. It's so tight in here, and with me like hunched over it, there's just no point. That's why I'm kind of trying to describe what I had to do. So if you have a Gen 3, you'll be able to get this out. But I mean, the gist of it is basically, you can see the square hole on this side and the circular hole on that side. The rubber stop sits in those, and then the other 2 on the top, where that like U-shaped recess is, those 2 mounting grommets screw in here and here. So you have weight, like it's on the frame and then it's bolted forward, and then basically your fan shroud and your AC condenser are mated to either side of the radiator via those clips. It's simple, it's just tight, right? Like that's why it takes so long. But anyway, we're gonna get it all buttoned back up, and I'll show you the finished product tonight. And then tomorrow we'll actually refill the system, which there's no way to actually fill the radiator. And in a lot of sports cars is the case where the radiator doesn't actually have a fill cap. You have to go through the reservoir. So basically what you have to do is like fill the reservoir, start the car, get the car up to temp so that the thermostat opens. It'll suck all the coolant out of it. And like you basically just keep doing that and like burping the system until there's enough, like there's coolant in the system and there's still coolant in your reservoir. Then you just top your reservoir off and you're done. You can cap it off. There's a machine that can like pressurize it and like shoot it through the system, but I don't have one of those. So I'm gonna have to do the old fashioned way, which will take some time. We'll do that tomorrow because this car's stupid loud, but we'll get it all buttoned up tonight. So I'll be back and I'll show you the finished product. Okay, the internet's gonna love me for this video. This was extremely difficult. Now it's kind of counterintuitive, guys. The row racing radiator is slightly wider than the factory one. So what you have to do is you have to move the oil cooler out of the way. It just has like 3 bolts that's held on by, and then you can kind of, there's some soft lines here so you can bend it. And then what you gotta do is move the fan shroud back out of the way, and you have to slide the passenger side in first. And the reason being is that the bottom radiator hose inlet, or exit, I guess, it protrudes, right? So you have to kind of get that under the frame rail, and then the radiator will slide into place. And the reason being is because actually on this side, you kind of, where's the light? Thank you. You kind of can see it down there. You see that hard line? I know it's hard to see, but there's a hard line right down there underneath this like insulated grommet thing. And that hard line's in the way. It's an AC line. Now you don't have to disconnect the AC condenser, and you don't have to disconnect the fan shroud. And the reason I bring that up is because the Gen 3, as we found out, Steve did some Googling, and we found out that the Gen 3, because that was when Chrysler was pairing up with Daimler, so they were doing a lot of Mercedes stuff. They were using a hydraulic fan on this car. So there are 2 hydraulic lines that I showed you guys before, and they're actually really difficult to remove. But you don't have to do it because it doesn't actually gain you anything, because the frame actually kind of notches in. So even if you had this out of the way, you couldn't slip the radiator in back here anyway, because it's actually narrower. So just kind of be careful and fidget it, but it will go in. Make sure that your condenser is sitting up straight and that it's not like cockeyed, like it hasn't collapsed at all, because it's not mounted to anything. And that's pretty much it. So once it's in, you know, you do your top mounts. Now we're gonna reconnect the fan shroud, and we're gonna reconnect the AC condenser to the radiator mounts. We transferred the clips over before, so that shouldn't be a problem. You know, reconnect the hoses, then we can start putting the car back together. All that said, the main thing that I wanna highlight is you do have to finagle the radiator to get it in a little bit if you're using an aftermarket radiator. If you're using an OEM replacement, it should slide right in. We didn't have a problem getting the OEM one out because it's a little bit thinner than the aftermarket one. The aftermarket one, it's literally like a ½ an inch thicker, and it makes all the difference. So you kind of have to like angle it like this a little bit and kind of notch it into place, like, you know, get that exit underneath the frame, and there's an AC line there. So if you pull up on the condenser on this side as you slide the radiator in, you'll tuck it underneath that AC line and you're good to go. You're golden. I could not find a video for this online, so I was like, I need to make this video because the Gen 2 is totally different. It uses an electric fan. It takes like 5 seconds to take the fan shroud off and take the radiator out. The Gen 4, Chrysler realized, why are we doing anything that Mercedes tells us to do, because their cars are impossible to service. So the Gen 4 Viper, even though it's the exact same body style as this car, has an electric fan, doesn't have the hydraulic fan. I would imagine makes it easier to you can just like kind of get the fan shroud out of your way so you can kind of see what you're doing better. Not that the fan shroud really matters in this case, but with that said, you do not have to remove the fan motor. It's gonna cause you headaches. We almost did it. We're glad we didn't do it. So, but one of the things that gave us the room to pull the fan shroud out and pull up on the condenser to slide the radiator in is moving the oil cooler. You got to unbolt that. You don't have to take the lines off, like I said, but there's just 3 Torx bolts. Just take those off and move the oil cooler out of the way. That's the pro tip. All right, we're gonna put the car back together. I'll be right back. All right, guys, front bumper is installed. Car's back together, basically. I'm gonna do the first fire up here in a minute. I gotta put the wheels back on. I did put the bottom plastic cover back on. I'm just gonna put the wheels on, lower it down onto the ground. I would kind of start it on the quick jacks and check for leaks, but last time this was on, it was on a 2-post lift, but it actually, like, we were using wooden blocks because the jack points in the front are kind of small. The car kind of like wiggles when it first starts because like the motor's so big, so it kind of shakes the whole car. And it kind of like moved it on the lift last time, which kind of sketched me out. So I just want to like put the wheels back on it and put it on the ground before I start it. It would have been a little bit more convenient to check for leaks without putting it on the ground first, but you know, it is what it is. So anyway, I'm gonna get the wheels back on, put it back on the ground, and we'll do the first fire up. All right, first fire up. I gotta wait till it gets warm, till the thermostat opens, and we'll see if we're leaking at all. My car's burping. All right, guys, I burped the system. Basically got the car up to temperature, turned it off, waited a couple minutes, pulled the cap off carefully, obviously, in case some steam came out. And it just kept burping fluid, kept sucking it in, and, you know, making all kinds of weird burpy noises, but I kept topping it off. And I just started the car, and we're sitting right around where the thermostat opens, which is around 190 degrees. That's where our temperatures are sitting, and no leaks. So I think we're good. I think we can call this one a success. I hope these tips were helpful. I know, like I said, there were no Gen 3 videos out there on YouTube that I saw. So hope this helps some other Gen 3 or Gen 4 owners. As usual, I hope this video was helpful. I hope this video was entertaining, and I'll see you guys next time.